I was fortunate enough to receive a copy of a manuscript, which is basically a study on adaptogens, which are basically defined as natural compounds or plant extracts that increase the adaptability or survival of organisms in the human body. And it's pretty interesting. This is like a 60-some-odd page report, but for most of you, it would probably take you an hour just to read one page and look up all the terms. And it's very interesting. We can't even cover all of it in one call, but I want to give you the nuts and the bolts of it. And what's interesting about talking about this study tonight and what's kind of happened with having to switch manufacturers to get to somebody who can really produce this product is so correlative to what was found in this study. They basically created in petri dishes, grew particular kinds of neurological brain cells in petri dishes, and then they measured the DNA. And you know, we got a lot of genes in our body, so we're basically talking about measuring the DNA of over 1,900 different genes, and that doesn't cover all that's in your body. That's just what's going on in your brain pan. They expose these cells then to specific stresses to see how the cell responds to stress at the moment, and then, of course, long term. And then they began exposing these very same stress cells to various adaptogenic herbs. And, you know, some of the ones they used are, in fact, in our Solera. Now, they monitored hundreds of what are called stress pathways in the human body. Your body responds to stress through many different mechanisms. There are hormonal mechanisms. There are neurotrophin mechanisms. And within each of those groups are hundreds of mechanisms that travel through different parts of our body that work to, A, make sure all the cells of the body have the nutrition and fuel that they need when you're in a stressful situation. And that stress can be inside stress or outside stress. And then what happens to that gene expression? Now, most of us, our bodies adapt very well for a momentary stress. We have all of these mechanisms in place that shoot through our system faster than you can possibly believe to help the system adapt. But when stress goes on for a prolonged period of time, the game can really begins to change. And here's some of the things, one of the reasons that they're looking at this is that we now understand that prolonged stress at the cellular level and at the organ level in the human body, when not mediated, when not brought back to homeostasis or balance within the system, you know, if you visualize in your mind one of the old telephone switchboards with hundreds of wires going in and out, hooked up to all these different lights, where an operator would sit there and plug one call into a hole so that person could talk to another specific person. And back in the day when telephones were first around, if you ever saw one of these things, they were really quite impressive. It's very much like that in your own body. And what we're learning is that lack of adaptation to stress may be one of the most important factors that affect aging and aging diseases. Now let that sink in for a minute. We're talking about diseases that are autoimmune. We're talking about diseases that affect our body's ability to regulate blood sugar. We're talking about conditions that affect our body's ability to think, to analyze, to cognitively function, to reason. We're talking about conditions that regulate our mood, whether we're happy, sad, depressed, even psychotic. We're talking about digestive health, gut inflammatory conditions, urinary tract and kidney conditions, adrenal conditions, thyroid disorders, and the list goes on and on and on. They wanted to know just, it's been observed in science for a very long time that adaptogenic properties of some specific herbs. The word adaptogen was really coined by a very famous Russian scientist back in the 1940s, but it was a guy that you guys have probably heard talk about by me and other people on these calls, about a guy by the name of Dr. Israel Beckham, who actually defined the specifics of an adaptogen. Those specifics are that adaptogen is non-toxic to the recipient. An adaptogen provides and produces specific response to stressors, increasing the power of resistance against multiple stressors. And that includes internal, external, and how it affects us chemically, physically, biologically, hormonally, and its ability to normalize the influence. Now, when stress is not normalized, when it goes on for a prolonged period of time, we begin to have something at the foundational level called oxidative stress. That's the last thing you want. Oxidative stress, we now know, can affect our blood, our hormones, our skin, our hair, our vision, our thought, our sexual performance, our fertility, our ability to digest our food, our liver's ability to cleanse and nourish the body. We call it the liver for a reason, because without it we don't live. In short, we've learned that these stress factors play a much bigger role, and science has been on the precipice now for at least 2 decades of getting ready to declare that aging is actually a disease. And this study actually adds a lot of meat to that very foundational thought. Now, here's what they did. They took these cells and they began exposing them to various stressors, and they measured the DNA, and they measured the various hormonal output, and they began to observe what happened to the cell. Then they were exposed to various adaptogenic herbs to see how things got modulated, or what the effect or influence was. And they did this with varying concentrated amounts. And boy, howdy, did they learn a few things. This part is really exciting to me and really revealing about the announcements that were made tonight about having to change our manufacturer. Because they found with some adaptogenic herbs, teeny tiny amounts were far more beneficial than large amounts. And then they found with certain other adaptogenic herbs, the teeny tiny amounts not only didn't work, but had the adverse effect. And so they went through this very long proposition, and hundreds of different proteins and modulators were measured. And in the final analysis, out of 1,900 different gene expressions, 1,900, just on these brain cells now, 1,900 different gene expressions, they found that 700 responded to adaptogenic herbs to renormalize and rebalance numerous processes in the human body. And it's really interesting if we look at adaptogenic herbs. There is this old science, well, maybe it's more actually a philosophy that's been out there for a long time, herbal philosophy, and it's called intuitive science, and basically it's called the doctrine of signatures. So in the doctrine of signatures, let's see, what would be a great example? Everybody's probably seen a walnut, okay? And if you take a walnut out and look at it carefully, it really resembles the brain. I mean, almost identical. It's a little bit freaky. And in modern science, many of us thought this was a bunch of, baloney. And guess what we found? That very walnut that looks very much like your brain actually has nutrients and phytoingredients that can help protect your brain from aging, can keep you mentally and cognitively healthy, and the list goes on. There are other foods. If you take a carrot and do a cross-section and put it next to a picture of an iris, it's almost identical. And what did we learn about carrots? What did you learn when you were a kid? Eat your carrots. It's really good for your vision. Well, it turns out that a lot of that's true. It's very rich in vitamin A, and now we found some other components relative to carrots that are really good. So in the herbal world, this has been around for a long time. I mean, way AD. And what they have found is that the condition that an herb grows in, its color, its fragrance, its shape, can be very relative to the specific part of your body that may be ailing. For example, there's a plant called lungwort, and it grows in the shade in very moist soil. And we know today that lungwort is one of the best herbal extracts for any kind of respiratory issues. It's been known for centuries to strengthen the entire respiratory system. Well, when we get to adaptogens, here's what's interesting about adaptogens. They're tough mother bears. They very often grow at very high elevations. They grow in very barren soil, and boy, it's the tougher one that survives. And it's because of that very environment that adaptogens get their power that they get to pass on to you and I. Now, what's happened with Mark Freemer and others that he's worked with over the years is that he has created a finite, very specific adaptogenic formula that's unlike anything the world has ever seen. There is nothing out there that compares with the chemistry and balance of this chemistry that we are just now beginning to understand because of studies like this. It is truly an amazing thing. I've read this study more times than I want to tell you. Of course, you know I kind of eat this stuff up. But they've actually been able to find out that there are 3 neurohormones that are kicked into action when we're in long-term chronic stress that affect our cardiometabolic system, our memory and memory impairment, immunodeficiency diseases. In fact, we're finally getting to a place where we're recognizing, and you and me and a lot of other people out there would rather work with foods and food substances such as herbs to help maintain the health of our body than we would have to go down the road and end up having to take a lot of medications. And medications are there, and they save people's lives every day. But it's not without concern because they have side effects. And the side effects can, for some people, be pretty disastrous. And yet, with adaptogens, remember the first thing that defines adaptogens is that it's non-toxic and does no harm to the recipient. It's kind of important. When we now study stress in a way that's never been studied before, where we're literally looking at how that causes cells to send out for help, basically send a telegram to various parts of our body, and how our body responds, you know, when you're 18 or 20, 30, or even 40, you know, you may get upset if you're stuck in traffic, but you don't get overwhelmed. All of a sudden, when you're 70, 75, 80 years old, driving in heavy traffic is almost more than you can take. It affects your cognition. When something happens, you don't quite know what to do. Your response time has diminished remarkably, not only mentally, not only cognitively, but physiologically as well. As we study what has been uncovered in this study, because there is a lot of data here that still needs to be analyzed in terms of practical application. But what they did get in this study that is so bloomin' exciting is that they have concrete evidence that many of the neurological and other disorders that are common in the aging population may be preventable. We have the first and only formula that I'm aware of out there in the marketplace that actually speaks to all 700 of these pathways that were studied in this report. And there's enough studies on Solera itself to back it up. This just gives us another layer of more intimate information to be able to track and develop even more sophisticated products down the road. Basically, the study concluded that the genome-wide effect of adaptogen herbal extracts in brain culture had an amazing adaptogenic stress response signaling pathways, and that those expressions indeed can prevent and help reverse age-related disorders such as chronic inflammation, cardiovascular health, neurodegenerative cognitive function, impairment, metabolic disorders, and even cancer. This is huge. This is like goosebumps on my goosebumpses. I love this stuff. And I can't wait. You know, I think, Rob, I'm going to become a Canadian citizen. Will you sponsor me so I can come and get my Solera?
There you go. No,
I'm going to keep it a little short. There's lots and lots of data that we'll probably pull out and talk about specific responses to cognitive studies, to blood sugar regulation studies that we can do later. But I think it kind of gives them the lay of the land to begin with. This is a landmark study. It couldn't have come out at a better time, because here we are with the opportunity to address many of these stress modulation issues. And for those people who really are having difficulty coping with the stress in their everyday life, we indeed have something that can help their body rebalance, modulate, or bring into homeostasis. So we're going to be able to help people improve the quality of their lives. That's a pretty big thing to me. It's a pretty big thing. And we're going to do it for a lot less than the cost of a prescription blood pressure medicine or even insulin. You know, I don't know if any of you in Canada got this report, but it was on national news here. By the year 2020, and folks, that ain't far away, there is not going to be enough insulin for people who have type 2 diabetes. It's time that we take a higher charge of ourselves and start getting into sharing and caring and working to adapt the stress. And I don't know about all you guys, but if I get stressed out, that's the only time I get in trouble with my diet. You know, if I can modulate my stress, the last 5 pounds that I want to lose at age 71 will be gone in a week. We're really blessed, and we're really fortunate that we are on this cutting edge of bringing an adaptogenic formula that talks to multiple stress pathways in the human body.